think I need the wire brush too badly. Folks, I'm going to put this Denso paste on all the metallic surface. What this paste does, this is really the primer. This really does the bulk of the corrosion protection. It's a penetrant, and once it hits the metal, it pacifies. If there happens to be any flash rusting or anything of that nature on it, it'll go onto that metal and basically neutralize any corrosion. So this really does the corrosion inhibiting. I pay specific attention to the nuts and bolts because 9 times out of 10 that's where you get the failures. So I'm just going to put this, you can apply this by hand, by brush. It doesn't have to be any fancy application. It's not the Mona Lisa we're painting.
Okay.
So like I say, you can use like a stiff bristle brush, a gloved hand. This is all non-toxic stuff. It's inert. There's no VOCs or anything like that. No solvents in it. So you have no confined space issues. Yeah, you just put a thin film of this on all the metal as best you can. And this is really what's going to do the corrosion work. Pretty much. Okay folks, that's about as much as you have to paste with it. There's just a thin film of this everywhere, and that really is the corrosion inhibitor. What I'm going to show you next is a couple of profiling materials, and they're basically designed to fill voids and cavities, especially around these nuts and bolts, so that you have a smooth area to not can fall on the tape and basically push it away. You've actually got some support right around the nuts and bolts. So this is a product called Profiling Mastic. Basically a mastic filler. It's again comprised of that petrolatum material. It has little closed cellular polymer or styrofoam in it, which actually puts some air around it to make it a pliable product, especially in colder temperatures. And it's just basically pushed in and formed around those nuts and bolts just to give you a smooth area to overwrap. And like I say, nothing fancy. You're just taking off those sharp edges and pushing it in. It's kind of like Flange for the kids.
How's it doing?
Doing well. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it coming down to the manhole?
I just find it's easier to cut into strips because you can just break them off and kind of shove them in.
The other side of that building is 16.
But we're also specifying it, around when the restraining
Yep.
because we want the valve so the thought is that you just have to do the ends, but not the bottom, not the whole thing. Just
oh, sure. But it's nice to know that.
How you doing, Bear?
Not bad, how are you?
That's pretty much it. There's not much else you have to smooth off here. You've actually added some extra protection to the nuts and bolts. And you can fill these little voids if you so choose. Just pack that in there. Like I say, it's nothing fancy. That's about as fancy as it has to look. I want to throw a little bit of mastic And we're going to go over top of this piece.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Just take the sharp edges off, fill those voids. The tape's going to do the rest of the covering. Okay? Pretty straightforward, folks, so far. About it, there's a little bit left over. So now, if you're doing some, say you were doing some bigger diameter, say this was, say, 12 inch and up, flange joints, to profile, you can use this mastic material, this mastic blanket, which has a fabric side. It has a mastic side, which is down. And this would be wrapped around those flanges, for example, much like a diaper. It's brought around and then it's kneaded around the nut and bolt just to smooth off. It's really typically used as a time saver for those bigger diameter. The small diameter stuff like this, I find the profiling mask is just easy to break it off, cut it off, and pack it in.
So you're suggesting 12 inch and up, perhaps, using this to match?
You can use that that mastic blanket as a profiling material as opposed to the profiling mask. That's correct. And that's strictly as a time saver. Okay, the tape itself.
Can you do this in the rain?
Pardon?
Can you do this in the rain?
We're about to find out, I guess. Yes, you can do this in the rain. These tapes are actually wrapped underwater. This stuff can sit in water, totally unaffected. We manufacture the petrolatum tape, and incidentally, this is the 80th year for Denso tape. We make it from 2 inches wide right up to 12 inches in width. This is a 6-inch roll, partial roll that I have here, so I'm just going to start with this. And typically when you take it, start down on the pipe 4 to 6 inches and just come around it. It's a pretty forgiving tape because you can just wrap it around. If you get a crease in it or a fold, don't worry about it. It's sticky and it's meant to be so that it sticks and seals to itself. You basically just force that air down, lapping the seams. You'll see how well it'll seal to itself. If you miss a spot, like I say, you just cut and paste. It really becomes almost like a glorified paper mache. Another 6-inch roller, another 8-inch. This will work.
Not that bad.
So don't be afraid to cut and paste this. I just come around. That area, cut the piece off and just smooth it down. I see a little wee spot that I may have missed. It's not a big deal.
Are you wrapping the whole valve there?
I will.
Okay. One on the jobs that we've been looking at.
Yes.
We expect epoxy coated fittings, valves, stuff like that.
Right.
So we suggested that all that needs to be protected is the part that's at greatest risk. That area that's not epoxy coated or otherwise protected, being the bolts and the gland, the restraining gland and stuff like that. What would you suggest if the valve or whatever got scratched and exposed?
That's really the essence of it, Herman. That's why we tend to wrap the valves, because once they're installed, and through nobody's fault, that epoxy is going to get a nick off it, and you're actually going to have a corrosion cell there where the corrosion will just target that area.
It's going to concentrate it.
It's going to concentrate right to that area. For the extra little bit of tape that you use, we just basically encase the whole thing. That way it's entirely sealed. There's nothing getting at it. It's part of the job. And it doesn't add an exorbitant amount just to wrap this little part of the body. By the time you do the bolts, the bonnet, your connections, you have a minimal area that would be left to wrap anyway.
Yeah.
The other kind of misnomer is well, we're going to use stainless steel bolts. What they don't realize is, though, a lot of times they're putting that stainless steel into dissimilar metals, and they're actually creating a bigger problem in doing that.
Yeah, we've not gone that route. I've seen research about that stainless steel is not your answer.
Right. Pretty forgiving. Anybody who's ever wrapped a hockey stick, a broom, whatever, you can put this on. I've only done this once or twice myself.
Now, if you miss a really small spot, does that make the whole thing useless, or?
Well, that's kind of the reason why you put the paste down first, because it is your corrosion area, or your corrosion inhibitor. And for the most part, you're not going to see any areas. Like, I don't think there's too many areas that I would have missed there. Because you're giving yourself at least an inch or two of overlap, you're ensuring that it's sealed to itself and covering that metal surface. And you don't have to use a lot of tape to do it. We wrap right up to the operating nut. I just put a thin film of paste on that nut just as some additional corrosion protection. For example, you can lift this up, move it around, stick it down, flatten out any seams. Basically all you're doing is making sure the air is out of it. And you got a nice smooth surface. You can feel pretty much by hand that you've got those areas covered. Like I say, if there is a little area that you missed, just cut a piece off, stick it on. It's cut and paste, paper mache, whatever you want to call it. Stick it in there, smooth it down, you're done. Now we're going to continue on here. I'll just wrap up this this side.
We should have done an elapsed time here.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to seal this up with the PVC because, like I say, we usually come down 4 to 6 inches on the other side. You can see how well that just seats down to itself, even with the wrinkles. It's smoothed out. Some folks will even say they're wearing gloves or whatnot, they'll sometimes, just to go over the material, if their hand's sticking to it, just take a bit of that paste to rub over it. It's not mandatory. It just sometimes allows the glove hand to slide over to seal those seams up a little easier. That's all it is. For example, if you had an area that you had very limited space, you can actually take the tape, and like I say, we make this from 2 inches right up to 12 inches wide. You can take a wider tape, cut a section off, say on a piece of plywood or a piece of cardboard, and you have very minimal area to get around. You can actually slide that tape on the piece of cardboard underneath it, lift it off, and go around in that fashion. So you have that option for really confined, tight spaces.
Does it rip easily when the stone comes up against your backhoe?
I'm sorry, does it?
Well, if you're backhoeing out with the hole, the stone's falling all around there, does it rip easily?
No, it's a pretty tough material. It's a synthetic fabric that doesn't degrade through time. So here's a spot that you just want to cover over. It's pretty tough stuff. You can throw the roll up to her, son, just so you can see what it's like. I equate it with Buckley's mixture. It's sticky, but it works.
Yeah, how's the taste, Blair?
Well, if you had to eat it, you could.
It's a trick question.
It won't kill you, put it that way. It's made from a food grade oil, kind of like the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices. They don't say. Looks pretty good the way. Smooth out. And all you're doing is just running your hand over, lapping those seams. That's really all you're doing. Here's an area where I got minimum space, so I'm just gonna cut it off and put it around.
Pretty sticky.
Anybody feel they couldn't do this? After seeing it? How many hands went up? I'm not looking.
The question is, you want to. Oh, I thought you said, did you want to do it?
You do this once, it's done. We have stuff in the ground now, 75, 80 years. They've come back, slit the tape open, read the serial number on the valve, put the tape back together, and walked away. That's really it. All the way around here. Just to make it pretty.
Well, I can't understand stupidity. We can't.
Yo,
Look at how much many addresses
watch
do they
out,
want. I
throw
don't
you in the
know.
hole. Throw the grid in there.
The fucking health card has my address on my picture. Is that enough?
What's a different color, Blair? Is that just...
It's just a different batch of effectively the same stuff. That's all you do. You got to come back and do any service work 20 years down the road. Slip this tape off around the bonnet. You're going to actually expose brand new nuts and bolts you can take apart, pull it apart, do your internal work, put it back together. You've probably exposed this area. Go around a couple of times with the tape again to seal it all up. You never know what's open. End of story. It's made to stand alone. There's nothing else you need to do. It replaces anything sacrificial such as sack nuts or anodes, anything like that, which work, but they do have a life. This has an indefinite life.